Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Free Speech Forward podcast. This is one that I've definitely been looking forward to because we have Angel on deck for conversation with us today. And I know Angel is definitely an expert in this space of free speech. So I'm sure he's going to have a lot of insights to help all of us, I think, really level up our games when it comes to being advocates for free speech. But I'm going to turn it over to my co host and co founder, Chris, who will introduce us all to Angel and get us started.
Great. Thanks, Joia, and thanks, Angel, for joining us today.
Sure, happy to be here.
So, for those of you who don't know, Angel Eduardo, who's our guest today, he is a writer and associate at FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Right? That's the E in FIRE?
Yes,
Yes,
used
it
to be
used to be
education.
education, and yes, and
Yeah.
now you've broadened your tent. So, we're really
Mhm.
excited. We were actually just talking, Joy and I, with Angel before we hit record here about our past with FIRE, which is a great organization. And Angel can certainly talk more about that if he wants, but that's who
Sure.
we got today. And as always, we like to start off by just hearing kind of the origin story of our guests. So, Angel, why don't you tell us how you came to standing up and being a leader and advocate for free speech?
Well, I don't know. I don't know about Joy is very kind, but I don't know how much of an expert I am. But I try my best, and I've learned a ton actually since joining Fire a couple of years ago. But my origin story, let's say, I mean, I grew up in an authoritarian country, and by that I mean my mom and dad's house. Uh, we we
I was waiting for the hook there.
Yeah. So, it was very much because I said so. It was very much, you do not speak unless spoken to. It was very much that kind of vibe. And I temperamentally was not suited to that. I had questions, and then I had follow up questions. And then if your answers were not satisfactory, I had even more follow up questions. And I would poke holes in things. And I didn't understand from a very early age, I didn't understand lying. So when I would hear things that didn't comport with reality, I would ask questions and usually get disciplined. So I became intimately familiar with what it feels like to not be able to speak your mind or question authority. And so free speech is a natural outgrowth of that situation, of recognizing the perils of that situation. Um, and then obviously being an artist, I play music, I write, I do all kinds of visual art and stuff. And, art and censorship are in a never ending battle. Right. So,
Mhm.
so once I got into that stuff and I started hearing about, censoring lyrics and album art and, artists pushing back, I'm obviously on the artist side. I'm obviously on the side of, well, let me hear it. Let me see it.
Mhm.
I don't want you to tell me why it's wrong and why I shouldn't even be exposed to it. I want you to explain to me what's wrong with it so I can see it for myself.
Mm.
So it's a combination of environment and just temperament, just
Temperament.
psychology.
Sounds like you were that archetypal kid asking why all the time, and your
Yeah.
parents exhausting your parents in their
Yeah.
efforts to answer it, right?
Yes, yes. And I was definitely a little asshole. So it's not like I was just this stalwart defender of principle. I was a little asshole. So I tested people's patience all the time, and I spoke up when even when I shouldn't have spoken up. Uh, all my report cards from elementary school said something to the effect of Angel is a very smart boy, but his behavior is inappropriate. so so that tells you pretty much all that. And just getting into what I do, I'm senior writer and editor for Fire, which is a free speech advocacy organization your listeners probably know about. And if you don't, please visit us at thefire.org. We will defend your right to free speech in court, on campus, and in the culture. That's what we do. Doesn't matter what you're saying. We don't care. If it's protected, we will defend it. No throat clearing, no apologies. And I found my home there a couple of years ago, and it's the best job I've ever had by far. I love what I'm doing. I love fighting for this principle, and I've learned so much. I mean, the amount of court cases and things that I'm aware of now is just crazy. I mean, my mom always said I should be a lawyer. You
Mm.
could probably tell why.
Yeah.
but um, but yeah, now I'm intimately familiar with First Amendment case law.
Hmm.
By no means an expert, but man, I got a crash course in the last couple of years. It's been
Getting there
very, very
quickly. Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah,
Fast ramp up.
And maybe it even takes being a little asshole. I think it's maybe a principle we should be adopting for free speech. But it brings up an important point that we always do need to question the status quo, even if we're ultimately going to decide that what the status quo is something worthy of being defended. It always needs to be questioned,
right.
and so we always need the people who can bring a little bit of that asshole energy, we might want to call it, to the conversation to make sure
Yeah,
that we actually are staying someplace we want to stay, or perhaps going in a different direction. One of the other things that
yeah,
really strikes me about your story is how much culture really does begin in the home, in the smallest versions of culture that we create. I think this is a theme that we've seen repeating here, how your family background can be so influential. You described that your family was like living in an authoritarian country, even though I'm assuming you were in the middle of the United States, which is
yeah,
the freest country, or at least one of the freest in the world. But it
sure.
strikes me that this is important for even others to recognize that if even the country that surrounds you does become more authoritarian, that it can always come back to that smallest culture that you create, a family,
Hmm.
a circle of friends, that you can create more freedom in the smallest versions of culture that we create. So I'm curious
Right.
to hear from you now that you've kind of gone through this journey and now that you are working with fire. What do you say for the people who don't recognize this value of free speech? Why would you say free speech is so important in order for us to flourish both as individuals and as societies?
Hmm. Well, it's funny because you never really have to convince people that they should have free speech. Everyone pretty much agrees. Oh, I should be able to say whatever I want
Hmm.
because everything I say is reasonable and good and fair and right and just. But not them. What they're saying is horrible, right? What they're saying is super wrong. Or, there's a thing that I call like the mind virus theory of censorship,
Mm.
which is, people will say, for example, like, oh man, Joe Rogan had some quack on his podcast and it was horrible. He was spewing all this misinformation. It's going to poison people's minds. And I would say, like, oh, well, did you listen to it? She's like, yeah, I heard the whole thing. It was terrible. And I go, oh my God, are you okay? Like, do you believe that stuff now? And they said, well, no, not me. I'm smart, but I'm talking about the idiots, the mud people. Right. And I I understand people can be deceived, people can be misled, right? Um, but the wrong way to go about it is to keep them from hearing things, right? You've got the forbidden fruit phenomenon, and I mean, if you told me when I was a kid you're not allowed to hear this, guess what I'm going to do, right? And guess why I'm going to do it? Because you said I'm not allowed. And I want to know. I don't trust you now. I mean, I've seen you
Mm.
mess up before. So how do I know you're right about this? So really, there's no getting out of that dynamic. And either way, you shouldn't want to be in that dynamic because, um, you know, you've been wrong before, right? James Baldwin has this great quote about, once people learn a thing, they start walking around as if they've always known the thing they just learned, and they
Hmm.
forget immediately that they had to learn everything they know. And that requires being wrong about things, making wrong assumptions, having them be corrected. And the only way that those assumptions can be corrected is through dissent. It's through people who don't agree with you and start pushing back. So yeah, you never really have to convince people that they should have free speech. It's always about whether other people should have free speech. And the best mechanism that I've seen for explaining to people why it's so important is what Greg Lukianoff calls Mill's Trident, based on John Stuart Mill in On Liberty, when he talks
Hmm.
about the importance of free speech. It's this three-pronged argument. He says in any given argument or perspective that you have, you are either 100% wrong, partially wrong, or 100% correct, right? And in all three of those cases, you still want free speech. If you're 100% wrong, you want free speech for those who disagree with you so that you can correct your error, right? And if you're 100% right, which is unlikely, you still want free speech and dissent because you want to understand why you're right. You don't just want to be right. You want to
Mm,
get why. You want to, first of all, understand the arguments of the people arguing against you so that you can refine your argument and understand it, which is why he says, he who only understands their own side of an argument understands very little of that, right? So even if you're 100% right, you still want to constantly deal with the friction of being pushed back on so that your your position is not coming from habit or superstition or just dogmatism, right? You want to actually be actively understanding why you're correct. But most of the time, we're just going to be partially right or partially wrong. And the only way to figure that out is by having other people who are all also probably partially right, partially wrong, to push back, and for us to do that push and pull. It's all about that tension. It's all about getting your intellectual muscles, doing the resistance training. I always say, go, take your ideas to the gym,
mm,
work
mhm,
them out, and if they don't survive your regimen, good. They didn't deserve to, right? It's a gauntlet. It should be brutal. My ideas, I don't want to be wrong for a second longer than I have to be. And the only way to do that is to have other people constantly pushing me. So I enjoy that. I enjoy the resistance. I enjoy dissent because it keeps me sharp. It keeps me sane. It keeps me honest. I think that's something that I think people overlook, but it's easier to understand if you just think back to a time when you were wrong about
mhm.
something and think about how certain you were that you weren't wrong until it finally hit you, until you hit that argument or it dawned on you, oh man, I'm not making any sense here. But you were so sure a minute ago. And we're notoriously biased and bad at correcting ourselves, so we should outsource that to
Mm.
our fellow humans, and find good people who are good at doing that. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer, but there.
No, you
Yeah,
touched on so many good points, and I agree with you. You know, your first point about people always seeing the value of free speech for themselves, but not for others.
yeah,
That was always odd to me because at I had a similar story to you. My background shaped my valuing of free speech from an early age, but to me, then like it just always was clear. Well, I guess if this is important to me, it's probably important to other people too. So like I always saw
hmm
that connection, but you're right how a lot of people kind of miss it. And I think I liked your referencing of the John Stuart Mill Trident argument as
yeah,
maybe one way to help people kind of make that connection so that they can adopt more of that value for defending it for other people, their right to free speech. But
right,
maybe you can also talk about, I mean, you're obviously very eloquent and you write for a living on this topic. So, are there other ways or mechanisms that you've found to be successful in communicating your ideas to others, and perhaps in particular, communicating the value of free speech and defending the right of free speech for others, including those who you disagree with? Like any other tips
yeah.
or tricks, or not tricks, but mental or kind of logistical processes or methods that you follow to kind of convey that
Mm.
message effectively to people, other than maybe just
Usually,
examples.
yeah, usually I try to think it. I try to guide people through um, second or third order consequences. Because for example, it's understandable for people to say, well, look, all these Nazis are marching and they're spewing all this horrible stuff. There's no value in that. There's no intellectual value. There's nothing I haven't heard before, right? It's just gross, the same old gross Nazi nonsense, right? So what is the value in allowing them to speak it? So let's just silence it so that, the people around them aren't hearing this horrible stuff and getting hurt by all this horrible stuff. I completely understand that sentiment, right? But the problem is that the dynamic doesn't end there, right? So we silence these people. What happens? They go underground, they hide, they only talk to people that they agree with already and that already agree with them. We never hear from them until something horrible happens, right? And that's worse than hearing a bunch of stuff we don't like, right? Now dealing with a bunch of events we don't that harm people or something horrible happens, right? And also more of them show up because the only people who will bring them in and talk to them about this stuff are the people who will make them more extreme. I mean, all this stuff these are real phenomena that happen,
Mm-hmm.
right? The polarization and the kind of, there's this effect where if you only hang out with people who agree with you, you end up becoming more extreme in those views because there's no one to temper that, right?
Right.
So,
Like you
just
said,
trying to
kind of.
guide people through those consequences that come after your censorship, right? And also, I mean, the biggest one is what they call the Weimar Fallacy, which is, if only we had censored the Nazis in
Mm.
Germany in the 1930s, the Holocaust may have been averted. And this is something that I learned when I joined FIRE. I didn't know about this history, but it turns out in the 1920s and 30s, there were very, very strict anti-discrimination laws, particularly against anti-Semitism, and the Nazis were prosecuted constantly. Their radio shows were shut down, their newspapers were shut down. Hitler himself was arrested and jailed multiple times and banned from speaking multiple times. And all that did was make it worse. All that did was embolden them, and they used that as a public relations bonanza. They just
Mm-hmm.
turned it into this thing. There were posters of Hitler's face with tape over his mouth and a caption saying, he among 2 million people or whatever it was. He's the only one who's not allowed to speak in Germany, right? So it turned into this thing of like, why won't they let him speak? He must be
Right.
saying something true, and it
Right.
just got worse and worse and worse. And then when the Nazis did take power, they used those same laws to silence dissent and shut their opposition down and maintain their power. So there's a danger to, even though it's understandable, there's a danger to to taking that road. And there's just really, one thing that I've learned, if there's anything that I've learned, is that there's no shortcuts to this sort of thing. If
Mm-hmm.
there are people who believe crazy, horrible nonsense, there is no shortcut to dealing with them and persuading them out of those beliefs. There's just no shortcut. You can't shut them up. You can't shut them down. You can't shoot them into outer space. You have
Yeah.
to talk to them. You have to deal with them. That's the only way.
I appreciate this perspective too, that there are no shortcuts. And thank you for sharing. I think these are two really valuable ideas that you've shared with us that I hope the audience really catches up on. First, this idea of thinking through the second order consequences. It's a method I've learned as an entrepreneur that's valuable when we're thinking about how we're creating products and services to bring to the world. But I love your point here too, that it's so effective as an argumentation tool to help people in their thinking, to help them think through, well, what does this really mean? If I put it in practice, it's not just the first level of what's going to happen, it's all the cascading effects of what's going to come next. And then also the Weimar fallacy, too, a history that I only learned that recently myself. So it is one that, why aren't they teaching this
Yeah.
in the schools more? Why isn't it one that we didn't all learn before we all graduated high school? So I'm
Uh-huh.
curious what your perspective would be on one of our favorite questions here, which is the blue sky question, which is if you did have all the money, all the resources, all the time to be able to
Uh-huh.
create or bring whatever you would want into the world to support free speech, what would be your thoughts of what we could do that would really be most effective to creating a more vibrant culture of free speech?
Hmm. I it would probably end up being something in education where some curriculum, some system of not debate, but learning how to have vigorous dialogue. Learning how, we there are many classes that I took where dialogue like that took place, but there was never a class that actually taught you how to do that and
Mm.
why it's important and how you can reap so many benefits from it. So, because I think the free speech thing is just tied to that principle of, you know, uh, civilization is grounded in our ability to communicate with one another and cooperate and
Mm-hmm.
collaborate.
Yeah.
And speech is the only real tool we have for that, right? We're on that continuum between speech and violence at
Mm-hmm.
any given moment, and we want to stay as far away from violence as possible. We know what that does. We know what that means when we get too close to that. So valuing that as the alternative, as the civilizing alternative, that's something that has to be taught, right? People have to
Mm-hmm.
understand it. Because I mean, it's free speech for all is the most counterintuitive idea. That's why Greg Lukianoff, he named his Substack the eternally radical idea. It's always going to be the thing that kind of grinds people's gears. One of our senior fellows, Jakob Mashangama, he wrote a book called Free Speech, History from Socrates to Social Media. Fantastic book. I highly recommend it, particularly because as you go through this history from ancient Greece all the way to today, you realize that there's a pattern, right? There's a bunch of people who are powerless and don't have the ability to speak their mind and dissent, and they value free speech and they fight for it and they espouse all the principles. And then once they get it, they go, yeah, but you know what? They can't say that. That's not going to work for us. We're going to have to shut them up. And it just keeps going in this cycle over and over again because it's just so counterintuitive. But we can teach young people from the start the value of open discourse and also the dangers of it, right? Like, you're going to hear stuff you don't like. And some people are going to be persuaded by things that are not true and that are actually really, really bad. So how do we deal with that? And we can show them how censorship doesn't work. Censorship might feel like the right thing to do, but it's not going to work long term. So what are the alternatives? How do we get into that? I would build a curriculum and some kind of system of teaching that and getting people to recognize that the only real way to preserve free speech for myself is to preserve it for everyone. Because any power you grant yourself to take away the rights of someone else, you're tacitly
can and
granting
will
it
be
to
used
them.
against you. Yeah.
The minute they have power, they will have all those privileges that you granted yourself. So
Yes, well, that certainly is the the philosophical and classical liberal arguments against
right.
concentrated coercive powers of any kind, right? Is that
Right.
they can and will be used against you if when you're not in power, those you support are not in power. So,
Exactly.
and I love what you said there. I mean, Joya and I, when we even first started our journey of focusing on free speech, we kind of, I think, identified critical thinking and communication skills as kind of two core components. So I think you essentially said something to that effect, but it also strikes me in this conversation that, especially given some of the great points you made, that perhaps there's something, maybe not innate, I struggle to use that word with human beings, but there's something fairly universal and common about not trusting other people to make their own choices and or to use their brains to come to the right conclusions and to discern good ideas versus bad ideas, and that
Right.
may be an insecurity about other people's ability to do that, perhaps lay at the root of that common sentiment you gave voice to, that people don't want. It's fine for me, but not for other people, right?
Right.
Like that they almost do. So I just wonder aloud if there's a way, if teaching that, whatever that is, emotional, security, or self-confidence, that maybe that's a component of this
Well,
this discourse or curricula as well.
yeah. It's a kind of faith in the process and a faith in other people.
Right.
Because it really comes from a solipsism, right? Like, I understand my own mind better than I understand anybody else's,
Right.
because I'm not in their head, right?
Right.
But so I get how I think, and I know that I mean well, and I know that if I was fooled, it was because these people deceived me. It's not because I'm dumb. It's because I was tricked, and these people were
Right.
dishonest. But I'm an honest person, and I can correct myself. But those other people, no, like,
Right.
they're going to get deceived and they're going to do terrible things, and they don't have the mechanism that I have. But how did you get yours?
Right.
So it's the same thing as the fundamental attribution error, which is basically the way I describe it is like, I have reasons, you have excuses.
Mm-hmm.
I'm late because there was a car crash and my dog puked, and all these things happen. That's why I'm late. I'm not a late person.
Right.
But when someone else is late, oh, they're disrespectful, they don't care about my time, they're a late person.
Yeah.
And that's just, we apply that all the time because we're only in our own heads. So we
Right.
kind of need a
Right.
theory of mind for other people.
Yeah. Well, I love that. That's a great maybe banner to put on it. So we'll add that to this curricula as well.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts? We're out of time, but
Oh, yeah.
just any last parting words on how to encourage more people to stand up and find their voice, speak out in defense of free speech, or really just even their values in a climate that is, if not outright censorious externally, that certainly encourages a lot of self-censoring as well.
Yeah. Well, it really depends what situation you're in. If you're in a household where, it might be dangerous, try to get help. Do what you can there. But in general, I would say speak your mind. Do it with compassion. Do it thoughtfully. Try to contribute thoughtfully to the discourse. Try to contribute compassionately to the discourse. There's no reason to dress your opinion in hateful language or angry language, right? People are more likely to listen to you if they feel like you're listening to them. So that's a really important bit. But definitely speak your mind, and if you think something is wrong, ask questions and push back on it. And if you find yourself in a situation where your speech has caused you to be unfairly punished, if you've been censored, if your free speech rights have been violated, thankfully you're not alone. We have an organization called Fire that you can come to and submit if you have something that's happened. Submit to us a case, and hopefully we can help you out if something's going wrong. But either way, we might become aware of it, and maybe we can support you publicly. So you're not alone. There are resources, and I think that's probably the most important bit is you're not alone. It feels like that,
Yeah.
but you're not. And look, you might be wrong. And the only way to find out is to have people push back. So you should welcome it. Because why would you want to be wrong longer than you have to? It's better to find out now than
Yeah.
10 years from now. Oh my God, I've been wrong for 10 more years than I could have been. So,
Well said.
yeah, speak up, speak out. Don't be afraid. Your ideas are not you. If you turn out to be wrong about something you strongly believe, hey, that's growth. That's
You
how it
growth,
works.
you've grown. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That
Yeah.
well put, and you're right. Your ideas are not you. I love that as an ending
Yeah.
statement. I think that's a big part in our, certainly in our current culture, and the tribalism and polarization is that people have kind of mistaken their ideas, ideology, politics, whatever, with
Right.
their identity,
Right.
and that then creates, when people see it as part of themselves, they naturally, inherent, that I'll say innately, want to defend, more,
Right.
more vociferously. So
Yeah,
it's,
indeed.
but when you can make that separation, that these are just
Yeah.
ways of making sense of the world that you can
Right.
learn and alter and change to make better sense of the world as you learn
Right.
more. I think that definitely can diffuse a lot of
I
that
I
tension.
um I like to think of it as, your ideas are like your clothes. You pick out stuff you think is cool, and some stuff is, people when they think of you wearing that thing, but eventually, you throw some stuff out, stuff kind of goes out of style. You might have some photos of you wearing stuff that you're embarrassed about, but they're just clothes. You're still you in all those photos, and you've been you this whole time. Your style has just changed. Your wardrobe has changed. You've gotten more mature, or whatever it is, right? You don't wear that goofy stuff anymore.
Yeah,
Um, but you're still you the whole time. It's not like you changed who you are because you've changed your wardrobe. That's not
right.
how it works.
Love that analogy. What a great one to end on. Oh, we'll keep that. Feel free to change your clothes at any moment in time, people.
Indeed. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Angel, for your time. This has been a great conversation. As we mentioned earlier, you can find him and his work and all of his team's work at Fire on thefire.org. That's their website.
Yep.
And as always, you'll find us every 2 weeks on our ILV Dissidents podcast channel and YouTube, and on our website at 1776forward.com. So see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks for your time. Thanks, Angel.
Thank you.